everyone, it's a great pleasure to be with you. My name is Andreia Pimentel. I work in Klabin's planning department, and we will be discussing a work that was developed in partnership. We have with us Eduardo from Klabin Planning's department and José from the startup involved. Just to give you an overview, this work was developed or started as a partnership between Klabin and Senai, and Klabin selects some challenging projects from a technological standpoint. And this project was highly applicable to the operational routine. This work involves the detection of forest roads. And if we look back the history from the times of the use of LIBOR in 2014, 2015, to the use of VANT, and then to obtain a large amount of data, to now, when we are able to use artificial intelligence and geoanalytics as part of a partnership to assist us in measurements and management in the field. So it's a highly applied project focusing on maximizing the use of assets. This is our agenda. We will be discussing objectives in further detail. We'll talk about the startup involved, that's José's part. We'll talk about the flow, utilization, and a little bit about methods, outcomes, and next steps. So a very objective conversation. This is a typical image of our wood harvesting and transportation process. So we come from a scenario where we had a level of technology regarding harvesting and transportation that require more roads than we do now. And our challenge is to maximize the use of this asset. So when we move towards this type of maximization, it's easy to identify by using a decision matrix, which is also a fruit of this work, a decision matrix that tells us that a given road no longer makes sense and can be used for forest growth. The challenging point in this development was the ability to quickly identify this exclusion or the need of a new road. What we did is to perform a mapping in order to identify which roads no longer made sense and could be used for foresting with high productivity in line with sustainability strategies. However, when we saw how slow it was to obtain this information relative to Klabin's productive scale, we had to look for alternatives to speed up the process. And that leads us to the solutions provided by this work. We will now talk about the startup involved, so José, can you please join us?
Hello everyone, my name is José. I am the CEO at Cycrop. Cycrop is a big data analytics startup working with the agribusiness. We were founded in 2015 and we started testing and we started experimenting with our technology in the first 2 to 3 years. We were incubated for a time at Google, and our focus is companies like Klabin and the major companies in the agribusiness. So to participate in this project with you is an honor and an opportunity. People have a very biased idea, in my opinion. They think that artificial intelligence and analytics, it's just going to be an off-the-shelf solution that is made by a startup that is implemented in the client, and there you go. But what I see is that the successful projects is where we work together. We work as a partnership. We wouldn't be able to do what we are describing here without the support from Klabin and the data from Klabin. for analytics, you need data. You need a whole string of data. So Klabin harvested this data and explored different ways to remotely analyze your planting and all your productive area. And at this point, you got ready, you prepared yourselves so another company could work in a partnership and create the results that we are going to show here. So I'm definitely at your service to answer any questions and to also, clarify anything. Thank you.
Thank you, José. I think you can start with methodology.
Legal, pessoal.
All
Então
right.
agora eu comento
Hello,
pouquinho
everyone.
da utilização da solução.
I am going to talk a little
Sou
bit about
Eduardo,
the
sou
utilization of
engenheiro
the
de
solution. My
planejamento,
name is
atuo
Eduardo. I am a
no setor
planning
de
manager
planejamento
and I
florestal
work
da
in
Klabin.
the forestry planning sector of Klabin.
Então, falando um pouquinho, né, do que é a utilização dessa
Let's get
solução que foi
into what
desenvolvida em
is the
parceria
solution
com
that
a
was
Cycrop.
developed in a
A gente
partnership
tem
with Cycrop.
processo dentro da área de planejamento que se chama
Within our
processo
planning
de análise
department,
de
we have a process which
aproveitamento
is
do
called
ativo florestal.
making the
Mas
most
o que
of the
seria então
forestry
essa análise
assets,
de
and
aproveitamento,
we do
né?
an analysis for
Qual
that.
que seria o
How
principal
does this
objetivo e para
analysis
que ela
work? What is
serve?
the main objective
Nós
and
trouxemos aqui
why do we do it?
exemplo,
So
né,
this is an example here
do
for you.
princípio. Então,
This is an
tudo se
example of the
inicia
principle.
ali num processo que a gente
Everything
chama de
starts in a process that we
macroplanejamento de
call the
estradas
macro
para
planning
colheita.
for
Então,
roads
todas as
in our
florestas da
harvest.
Klabin,
So
sejam
all of
elas
Klabin's
florestas de
forests,
eucaliptos
whether
ou
it's
florestas de
eucalyptus
pinos,
forests
elas
or
passam
pine
por esse
forests,
macroplanejamento
they go
prévio
through this
que tem como
this prior
objetivo
macro planning.
construir o
The
melhor
objective here
projeto de estradas
is
que
to put together
atenda
the
às
very
demandas
best road
operacionais.
project to meet
Então, hoje a
our
gente tem
operational demands.
ferramentas de
Today we
simulação
have
e
simulation
otimização de
tools
cenários
and
físicos
scenario
e
optimization
econômicos de
tools
estradas e colheita que
so we can
buscam
analyze our roads and
otimizar
harvests,
o uso do
so
ativo
we can
florestal
optimize our
a
forestry
partir da
assets
redução da
by
densidade de
reducing
estradas
the
já
density of roads
existentes
that
no
already
povoamento.
exist.
E essas ferramentas, elas consideram
And these
características
tools
específicas do
they
bloco de
consider
colheita, como, por
characteristics
exemplo,
that are specific for
declividade,
the crop and
fragilidade do
that area.
solo,
For example,
e até
slope,
mesmo
soil
o tipo de
fragility,
produto que vai
and
ser
also the
produzido
type
naquele
of
bloco,
product that
e
will
também
be produced
aspectos inerentes à
in that
operação,
block,
como,
and
por
some aspects that
exemplo,
are
os diferentes
inherent to the
sistemas de
operation.
colheita
For
que a Klabin
example, the
utiliza
different
hoje em
harvest
dia,
systems
são
that
o Full
Klabin
Tree e
uses,
o
like
CTL,
Food Train and
e
CTL.
aspectos ainda mais específicos
And
da
there are some
operação
even
de
more
colheita,
specific
como, por
aspects
exemplo,
in the
a
harvesting
distância
process. For
máxima,
example, the
média e
maximum
mínima
distance, the
de
medium
extração.
distance, and the minimum
Então, todos esses
extraction distance.
parâmetros são
All of those
considerados na
parameters are
construção
considered
desse
when we create
projeto de
this
estradas
project,
e a gente sabe, né,
roadway
que
project,
na execução
and we know
desvios
that when
podem
we
acontecer,
execute it, some
sejam eles
deviations might
desvios
happen,
inerentes à
whether it's
operação ou
deviation inherent
desvios
to the
causados por
operation
algum
or
fator
deviation that
climático,
is
que são
caused by a climate
fatores que a
factor.
gente não
These
controla
are
e que
factors that
impactam
we cannot
diretamente
control, and they have
na
a
operação.
direct impact
Então,
in
dessa
the
forma,
operation.
surgiu a
So in
necessidade
this
de
way,
ter monitoramento
we needed
para
to
que
have
a
a
gente
monitoring
pudesse
process
corrigir esses,
to make sure we
esses
could
desvios,
correct
ter um maior
for this
controle das
deviation,
operações,
to have more
indo um
control
pouquinho mais
of our
além,
operations,
antecipar
and
essas
to go a step
informações e
beyond. We
transformá-las
wanted to
em
anticipate the
tomadas de
information and
ações
transform it
práticas ali na
into
realidade
practical
operacional.
decision making
Então, a
and
gente
some
traz aqui
practical actions
exemplificado
in the
o
operational
momento de
field.
uso
So
dessa
this is the
solução de
moment where we
detecção de
use
estradas,
that
que ela
solution.
busca, então, comparar
This
esse
solution
projeto que foi
compares the
construído
project,
ali
the roadway
previamente
project that
e
was put
medir
together
essa
before,
aderência ao que foi
and we
planejado.
measure the
E a gente
adherence
está
or the
buscando
adoption
ali
to the
olhar
plan.
tanto
And what we are
os
trying to see
desvios em
here
relação ao
is the
planejado e
deviation
também buscar
according to the
entender
plan,
se houve
and we
algum
also
desvio
want to
que
understand if
por
there's been
motivo,
any
por algum
deviation
motivo
that for
ele
some
acabou
reason
fazendo sentido e que a
made
gente pode
sense.
manter
And in this
ele
case,
como uma alteração
we
do
might
projeto
maintain it
de
as
macro.
as an
E o
alteration
grande
of our
ganho
macro
aqui, então, ele
project.
está na otimização do uso
So
do
the
ativo.
gain
Então, a gente
here
está
is in optimizing
ocupando
our
áreas
assets.
que
We are
antes
occupying
eram
areas
estradas
that
e
used to
áreas
be
plantadas de
roads,
floresta.
and now they are
Aqui,
planted
nesse fluxo, a
areas.
gente traz esse exemplo,
In this flow
pegando
here,
o momento de uso
we
da
show
solução
an example when we
e
use
seguindo aqui
the
o fluxo
solution,
da cadeia de
and when
implantação
we
de novas
follow
florestas,
the
que se
chain of
inicia
implementing
com
new
a primeira
forests, which
operação da
starts
silvicultura,
with
que
the
seria o
very
preparo
first
de solos,
forestry project,
e
which is
segue
soil
aqui
preparation.
para o plantio
We
e
get
as
to
atividades de
the planning
monitoramento da
stage and
qualidade
also
das
the
florestas.
activities of
E
quality
hoje, para o
monitoring for that
eucaliptus,
forestry
vai
areas.
até os 240
And for
dias e para o
eucalyptus is
pinus
240
até os
days, and
500
for
dias.
pinus all the way to 500 days.
Na sequência, pessoal, a gente traz então
So,
os
moving on,
resultados
we
dessa
get the
solução.
results from the solution. So I'm going to start by saying here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the main deliverables, and José is going to help me by adding on to it. So again, our work is done in a partnership with Cycrop, and there are two specific focuses. So we divide it in two steps. Early on, we chose to develop a solution that is focused on satellite images. These are inferior quality and inferior resolution images, as you can see here on the left-hand side of the presentation. And we now have what we call the technical limit for that development. So we did have some acceptable results that were really interesting using this new technology. However, we chose to always focus on the UAV images, which is, images of better quality. And this aspect of which image to use is very much related to obtaining those images. Getting the images, it always depends on the availability that Klabin has at the time of the analysis. So right here we have these two examples. We have the results of satellite images and UAV images. So José, you can feel free to add on if you want to. Right, so one of the interesting things is that the satellite has a high rate of maybe 2 to 3 days in a resolution that is like 1 by 1 meter, or it might even be better, like 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. I can tell you this is perfect, and UAV is a more robust solution. And when we got into that process, when we started to develop this solution, we started doing a classification. We had to do a very specific classification of the strengths and weaknesses of each piece of technology. We cannot just assume that this or that data source will be always the better. In the analytics process, you need to summarize it, and you need to really study your data source in depth. And that's one of the key aspects of this project. It doesn't mean that we cannot use satellite images ever, but for the scope that we defined, the UAV data is much better on that scope. So in the next step, maybe in the future, Klabin might switch. We might get better results from satellite images. It's important to say as well that this opens up other doors. We are talking about satellite images, but like I said, we concluded that perhaps when you look at the radar data for satellites, that can replace the image information for roads. In the case of the UAVs, the results were clearly better, but Klabin didn't jump to any conclusions. Klabin was careful enough to focus on 3 important KPIs, and we had to chase those to know if our satellite approach would be better than the UAV. So that is definitely a success factor for AI and analytics. You need to have the right KPIs to know if you have to move on to the next step or not. So that's what I can add on to the presentation at this point. Great, José. And by the way, speaking on the main KPIs, alongside the project team, we defined those KPIs to measure the metrics, right? To measure the success metrics of our development. So these are the main examples. We were observing the comparison between the roads that were executed, considering the macro plan, compared to the macro plan of roads that we shared in the beginning. And the gain it was to verify how we were meeting the demands and the operational needs, to know if that project was really the best one, and we could correct and adjust as we needed to. One other KPI that we discussed at length was measuring the roadways that were not executed compared to the planning. So this KPI enabled us to draw conclusions in terms of reviewing the project, so we can actually get an understanding of it, to know if the project is really adherent or in line to the operations. And the last KPI that we also kept tabs on was to monitor the roads that were executed and not planned. This KPI enabled us to draw some conclusions. For example, is this road executed? I mean, this road was executed and it wasn't planned, but for some reason, it met the needs of the operation. So we review this information, we do a new assessment of the block as a whole, and we might choose to maintain this roadway, or in the next cycle, we can make that correction. So those were the main metrics that we worked with. And by measuring those metrics, we were able to do our jobs. José, I don't know if you have anything to add on at this point. Yeah, your points were really important, and the validation of the KPIs was a very important strategy as well. We used the agile methodology. Every week, Cycrop had to deliver a report that had to be validated by Klabin, and we had very objective meetings, knowing what was going to be discussed in the meetings. Basically, it was about the KPIs, how we were meeting the KPIs versus what were the barriers. So if we met it, great, we can continue to do that, or if we didn't meet it, what happened? Oh, we had a limitation on the imaging, we had an issue because we mixed up the harvested soil with the color of the road. There were some points like that, but every Friday we did a meeting and we went through the checklist, and it was quite a straightforward meeting. We knew exactly what we had to do for the week. So that's what is important. It's not a closed project that you hire or contract in one day and see you in 3 months. No, there is a weekly interaction, which is really important as well. Absolutely, José. So this type of interaction enables us to do quick adjustments and to deliver outcomes that were even better. So that was absolutely great. Well, folks, right after that, this is a vision of the next few steps of this project. Like we said before, we started the project in 2020, and in 2021, alongside Cycrop, we proposed a new phase of development, and now José is going to tell you a little bit more about that side. What about the phase 2 of the project to detect roads, José? One important thing is that we didn't become overexcited about the results of the first few steps. Usually people get encouraged by social media and just the overall buzz that exists with AI. A lot of times we get results, the results are proven, they are tried and true, we reach the KPIs, that's all great, but we have to remember the maturity level of Klabin's industry, and we had a timeline, just like Eduardo said. It is important for us to know that this process is going to be repeated. It's going to be replicated at every season. So in other words, it's not just a one-off thing. This is going to have to walk in its own legs. This is a continuous operation. So we have to bring the strategy that was implemented, and we have to create an optimization robot. And sometimes in this process, theoretically, that should be seamless, but that process might not go forward. So we have to go back a few steps, and we might have to do some tweaks and adjustments. For example, all the artificial intelligence systems need to be trained, and sometimes this training is not really in line with continuous process and has to be changed. And this is one of the things that we are doing some modifications to because of the automation process in order to develop this process, and we can have, and so we can have the least human interaction as possible and still be able to detect roads. The other thing is noise. Sometimes noise can become uncovered signs, so to speak. So one image can bring so much noise that the training might become biased, and it starts detecting what is not roads than the main objective, which is to detect roads. Therefore, we have to continue doing this process. We have to always revisit the model to make sure that it's still linear, to make sure that all the KPIs are still in line, the ones that we validated before. And for that much, we always have to keep an eye on the neural networks that are most used for this analysis. In this case, it's geoanalytics. Even though we had a great result in the previous process, we know that the usage of neural networks is more indicated to keep the stability and to get good role detection when, according to the KPIs. So these are the next few steps that we are developing here. We are trying to maintain an agile process alongside Klabin. And again, it's not a one-way street. We need the algorithms, but for it to work, we have to work together. And that's really open innovation. And it's so gratifying to be able to do that. It's a great opportunity with Klabin. Thank you once again, folks.
Thank you, José. Thank you, Eduardo, for having explained things so well.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for the opportunity.